Good morning, America. How are you? Monday Morning Rail. Hi, I'm Denny Jelsma, and I'm at the world-famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines. Today is Monday, and you know what we do on Monday. You guessed it. We do show and tell. Show and tell is always brought to you by Jelsma Graphics, the people that do all the railroad embroidery since 1985. All kinds of shirts, jackets, hats. Go to jelsma.com. That's JELSMA.com. And with all that said, show and tell is going to start just in a moment, and we're going to continue the tour of the museum of the Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum. And we have our president, Rodney Butcher. He is going to give us a quick tour of the layout, and it is show 177-2. Last week was 177-1, and we're going to continue on that. And with all that being said, here's Rodney. All right, Rodney, you want to give us a kind of a real quick recap of what you did last week, and then we'll go on to the next segment.
All right, Denny, welcome back, everybody. We're going to show you the other side of the terminal. This is the Lee Street end where the Florida East Coast takes over from the coastline. This is the Bay Street side, the old original Flagler Terminal remnants, which is now offices and baggage. The concourse where the button blocks are. The 15 button blocks and 10 through tracks.
And that handled 100 plus trains a day, passenger trains.
Our Railway Express was actually the U.S. Post Office. We had to combine them due to constraints of space. The Railway Express agency was actually just as large as the terminal was. As we proceed to Myrtle Avenue, you'll see the beginnings of Interstate 95, Myrtle Avenue, which was the gateway to the terminal. All the operations focused on Myrtle Avenue. And we head towards the locomotive shops. We're heading north. The locomotive shops had been modified to handle diesels. The Seaboard started coming here in '38 with their first diesels, and they also had facilities for bunker C for oil burn steam engines, as well as coal.
Now the Florida East Coast used the bunker C, correct?
Florida East Coast used bunker C, and some of the Seaboard engines used bunker C so they could advertise being cinder free. And the Jacksonville Terminal Company also had a few oil burners. And we proceed around to the car shops and the wash rack facility at Beaver Street. Beaver Street was the main artery for trains going through. All the freight came through here as well as passenger from the north. So we're at the very north end of the terminal. This is Beaver Street overpass, and we show the freight operations of the terminal. Atlantic Coal Storage was a large facility. There was two facilities. This was the more modern of the two. The original was down towards the where we have our Swift plant. Then we go around to A&P, the original building, and they built a more modern building for the freezer. And this was the end of Jacksonville Terminal Company. At Myrtle Avenue, it turned over to the Atlantic Coastline.
Now, the Jacksonville Terminal Railroad they did the switching, and they were owned by?
The Jacksonville Terminal Company was owned by the Atlantic Coastline, the Florida East Coast, the Seaboard, the Southern, and the GS&F. The GS&F and Southern were joint 25. They're 50-50 of their 25, if you will.
Okay.
The Atlantic Coastline was a big yard.
This is Moncrief.
Moncrief. They had a large ice house facility. They made ice and ice reefers from the south before heading north.
What was this shed used for?
That was B-yard shack. That was just another field yard office. It was a 2-room shack. Then as we go to the north end of Moncrief, they had a large engine facility with a roundhouse, which was removed in the late 50s when it went to all diesel. The engineering building that you see here is very common. They had them in Rocky Mount and Waycross, and I believe they had a few more, but I can't recall right off. Then we had our standard Moncrief Tower, typical of the Coastline interlocking towers.
This was the sanding tower there.
Yes, Coastline made their own sanding towers. They were unique, so we wanted to copy what they did with that. Now, at Moncrief, we went north, and we had a crossing for the southern to go from Simpson Yard to the port, and the original JS&W crossed here, but after the Coastline acquired it in the early 1900s, they branched off in east and west from Milldale to Newberry area, Alachua. So that concludes the Jacksonville segment. On the Atlantic coastline, as you left Jacksonville, you went through the communities of Densmore, Pickettville, Callahan, and eventually ending up in Hilliard. And we have chosen to do the train museum that was built there between 1966 and 1971. So it had a brief stay, but it was a very fun place to go. And one of the pieces of equipment they had there was the old Coach Jim Crow car off the General. But this was not the Atlantic Coastline station. It was an Atlantic Coastline station that the Coastline put there for the museum, but it's now been relocated as a home. And as we continued leaving Hilliard, we went to the Florida-Georgia state line at the St. Mary's River. This bridge is in the middle of nowhere, very secluded, so you cannot get to it. There's no roads.
And I think we did a really accurate job of portraying how it actually looked. It was very wild and out in the middle of nowhere. Right here is where we crossed from Florida into Georgia.
After crossing the state line, we enter Folkestone. Most people are familiar with Folkestone. It's now the Folkestone Funnel, which is enjoyed by many for train viewing. But back in these days, it was still the automatic block with the interlocking tower. Again, we have another Atlantic Coastline interlocking tower at a typical Atlantic Coastline station, where the railroad came from Waycross.
That was right here.
Yes. And the other leg was the belt line that went to Jessup, which was put in the early 1900s after the Southern Railroad obtained trackage rights into Jacksonville. So this track was CTC'd in around 1971 and proceeded down into Jacksonville, and that was the end of the interlocking towers around 1972. But also want to mention that the signals back then were all semaphore.
Now, did any named passenger trains stop at Folkestone?
No, it was a rural.
So just the locals?
Milk train stop, yeah.
Well, we all know where Folkestone is.
All right, now after leaving Folkestone, we're going to jump up to Jessup, which is the furthest point that we model to. Jessup had one of the last stock pins that I can remember, and we decided to show it. Entering Folkestone, they had a few little yard areas, and Jessup is where the Southern came in to come to Jacksonville with the Kansas City, Florida Special. The Skyline came in and joined that train.
That was the Southern train.
Southern train. They came in from the Savannah side, and they joined and came in as one train. The Kansas City had a segment that went on to Brunswick, but for the most part, this was a premier Southern train into Jacksonville via traction or trackage rights.
And so the Southern actually got onto the Atlantic Coastline's track, had trackage rights into the terminal.
They also had a freight train. And that concludes the Atlantic Coastline into Jacksonville. Now we'll go to the southern end of the Atlantic Coastline. Now we're on the Sanford subdivision that ran from Jacksonville to Tampa. We start at Park Street Overpass and proceed down Roosevelt Boulevard. We pretty much duplicate what people have seen so they could recognize and enjoy the areas, how they've changed over the years. This is Old St. John's Avenue, and then we proceed past Huckins Yacht, which built PT boats, and they're still in business to this day. Then we cross the McGurk's Creek, which people call Ortega River. This bridge was originally a single-track swing bridge, and at the end of the war, from Camp Johnson to NAS, Naval Air Station, the railroad double-tracked to NAS. And this bridge was rebuilt and double-tracked. Now it's a single track.
But the ACL had a station and in the NAS, the Navy station for the military.
Yulee Station, right. Yeah. And then we'll proceed down Roosevelt Boulevard through Ortega. And now we're coming to Orange Park along Doctors Lake Drive and the former Atlantic Coastline Orange Park Station. Orange Park also had a Doctors Lake station out. It was just a milk stop, but this station was in the area where Jack Hurd keeps his office car 300. So when you're here, you can follow the railroads that you're operating on, and today's segment was the Atlantic Coastline. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rodney. That was really interesting. That it was 177-2. That's the second part of the history of the Jacksonville area of railroading. We modeled the Jacksonville Terminal. That's where our name is, the Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum. Next week, we will start out with another railroad. Remember, there's 4 to 5 railroads that came into Jacksonville, and we just got on talking about the ACL. And we just thank the listeners that watch us week after week. We really appreciate it. And next week, we'll have part 3. And with all that being said, that's the way it is at the world-famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida.